we fought, we lost, we died. And now, seeing you all alive, oh God, I didn't think it would hurt so much. I'm Eddie Webb.
I'm Chris Spivey.
And today we're doing a special, extremely short edition of Speechless. Hello and welcome to Speechless. We're not doing the James Bond run just yet. We decided
Eddie,
that we
what-
wanted to.
Eddie?
Yes.
So what I didn't tell you that I almost did before you started speaking is
Of course.
I almost then did a bit. No, actually, I was going to wait for you to start the recording. And then before you started speaking, I was going to do a bit where I jumped in and made like I was future Chris from the future in my current body. And then like talking about how critical it was that we properly recorded Goldfinger, and those two recordings that didn't work, that we decided to skip it, ended all of humanity in time. So I came back to give us a buffer of episodes so we could record Goldfinger.
See, this is why you communicate things to me as opposed to trying to surprise me.
But it's too early on my end, and I didn't have the energy to do it, other than describe it and to awkwardly explain to our listeners why we said Larry throwing in one of the best X-Men runs ever.
Fair enough. Yes. As Chris alluded to, we've had some issues on James Bond end, so we're quickly doing a few episodes to kind of give us some buffer. But we don't want to. We could have just said, like, "Hey, let's take some Patreon episodes and throw them in." We said, "No, let's use this opportunity to do something that we don't really get a chance to do very often, which is compare compare a thing and then an adaptation of the thing and how they line up." So over the next few episodes, we're going to talk specifically about the X-Men and more specifically the Days of Future Past storyline, which is one of the most iconic storylines from early 80s X-Men.
Yeah, hands down. Now, I guess if I was a listener, I would be curious as to why, out of everything you've mentioned over the past few years, you chose to do this, not something else that you've talked about that you can make a comparison to.
I like how this is now suddenly my decision, my choice.
Because, Eddie, I'm merely here to help facilitate. That is my role. You make all the key decisions. You schedule out all the recordings.
None of that is true. But it is actually a fair question in the sense that talking about adaptations and specifically digging into adaptations can be frustrating for a couple of reasons. If the adaptations are too similar, then it just feels like talking about the exact same thing over and over again. That's why, for example, we didn't go through the Watchmen comic before we talked about the Watchmen movie, because the Watchmen movie is basically the comic. We would just be talking about, wow, look at how great Dave Gibbons' art is, and it'd pretty much be the whole episode. If the adaptation's too different, it feels too like you're talking about two completely different things, and you lose all the nuance of the actual adaptation or the actual discussion. And then if the adaptations are too long, then even no matter how varied they might be, you're just talking about the same thing over and over again. That's one of the reasons why, for example, on the Sherlock Holmes run, I specifically chose to not have the any of the runs be the exact same story, because it would have been like, oh, look, here's Hound of the Baskervilles again, So when we decided we had to kind of make this rather sudden change, one thing Chris actually mentioned, hey, let's maybe do Days of Future Past. I thought this might be a good opportunity because it's relatively short. It's 2 issues of comic book, and the other adaptations are relatively short. But it's also a story that is relatively well known. If you are an X-Men fan, you've probably seen some version of this story at some point. And every adaptation has done something different with it. So it's a nice intersection of what you would like to if you do so. So it was a good opportunity to do something that we danced around that didn't quite make sense. This actually made sense.
And it also resonates specifically with the current times that we're in, as the X-Men seem
Yes.
always to do, given that it's a group of people that are being targeted and essentially killed and exterminated.
Right. Exactly. Um, and it's wild how I have read this story probably 7 or 8 times, um, since the '80s, and each time I read it, I go, "Wow, that's really relevant to today." And, like, every
Yeah.
decade I read it, it's like, "Oh, wow, that's really relevant to today." And sometimes it's different reasons, um, but it just reminds me how, when we were talking about X-Men '97, when there was some discourse at the time about how X Men had gone woke, and it was all veiled stabs at certain administrations, and it's like, no, it's just how X Men always are. So it's like it's the fact that the real world has caught up to the X Men is not the X Men's fault.
Once Stan Lee stopped writing the X-Men, they essentially went woke, is what you're saying.
Right, basically, yeah, they went woke. That'll be David Cockrum is the main reason why X Men are woke in the '70s.
And then Claremont, I think we've already talked about it to some extent, though, is how Claremont made them explode, and it was like the hottest ticket around for a long time.
Yeah, certainly. And this run is right in the heart of that first real big explosion of X Men. This was about the time where the comic got really hot for the first time. So this is one of the earliest dream teams of John Byrne and Chris Claremont, who were actually both co-plotting at the same time. We are literally 4 issues from the Dark Phoenix saga, which was one of the biggest long-running epics of the X Men. So we're right in the aftermath of the Dark Phoenix saga, and it's this. Yeah, this is like a lot of what makes the X Men great now stems at least somewhat from this run of about 100 comics.
And funny enough, this specifically for this run, John Byrne wanted, from my understanding, John Byrne wanted to write about Sentinels, and Chris Claremont's like, I didn't want to write about Sentinels.
Mhm.
And so the two, it was interesting to know that, and the fact that some of the stuff I was reading is that Byrne says subconsciously, I'm doing finger quotes, he lifted the plot of like Day of the Daleks from Doctor Who.
Well, I mean, which makes sense because, like, it's funny. Like, on the one hand, uh, parallel dark universe is in no way, shape, or form a new concept, even by 1980. Right? It had been done quite a lot by 1980. So it wasn't a new concept, and yet X Men is obsessed with dystopian dark futures. There have been quite a number of them over the decades of X Men, and I think some of it is because uh, uh, various riffs off of Days of Future Past. But to your point, like it's telling because this is if you look at the individual pieces of Days of Future Past, specifically the comic, which we'll start with here. Um, each of them in isolation doesn't look like anything special. It is Claremont's long game soap opera stuff runs right through these 2 issues. A lot of stuff that he set up beforehand is continuing to play off things that he's about to set up is starting to come into fruition in future issues. So, like, it's just, in some respects, another 2 issues of the comic. Similarly, John Byrne has moved more into co-plotting, and so more of the epic bombacity that John Burns really loves, and the weird sci-fi stuff that he will then go on to do more of in Fantastic Four in a few years is also coming to the fore. So of course it's going to be a parallel future time travel story on some level, right? So like that these are very much of course moments, and yet for 2 comics, the sum of the parts is much greater than the individual pieces. Um, and so this feels we're digging into why that might have been.
But this is also the first dark future for the X-Men that they presented, though, isn't it? I
Yes, it
know
is the
that
first one.
they'll do a bunch in the future, but that is because this was so successful and groundbreaking that everyone says, "Well, I wanna go and do that. I wanna, like, touch a piece of that and
Right.
make my own riff."
And honestly, we could talk more about that when we get to the adaptation of this, because the adaptation does some really clever stuff with the fact that the X Men have a whole bunch of dark futures, um, and helps to kind of
Yeah.
do some interesting things with that to make the adaptation itself interesting. But you're right. This is the first one. This is because again, this run of 100 issues establishes a lot of what we now know of as tropes for the X Men specifically. Prior to issue 100, it was just kind of trying to figure out what the reboot was going to look like, and then Chris Claremont picking up the ball and trying to figure out what he wanted to do with it. Um, right around when Dark Phoenix kicks in is was Chris Claremont starting to set down the ground rules, and because it was so successful, it was a lot of people going, "Oh, do more of that because that's successful." And so X Men started developing tropes and whatnot. And then X Men has had a fascinating run of reapplying and then breaking and then reapplying its own tropes, which is something that there's no way we can go into. Definitely, basically, our usual thing of go listen to Jay and Miles explaining X Men, because they do a really fantastic job of step by step showing you here it builds up, here it breaks down, here it builds up, here it breaks down, the ebb and flow of what X Men stories are like. Um, but surprisingly, I was double checking recently, and they do cover Days of Future Past, but they don't really gloss over it. They just don't give it as much dig in as they do some other storylines, which is a bit surprising. But then again, this is one of those stories that nowadays would be a 5 issue arc, and it's only 2 issues,
Yeah, but I also think
which
they
tells you
covered
both
it
kind of
around
the state of
episode
comics in
6 for
1980.
them,
Right. They were still finding their feet too. So yeah, that's a good point.
and because much like us, nearly 150 episodes in, we're still finding our feet, but they found theirs pretty quick, so I'm just saying.
Right. Because they're much better at this than we are. As no shade whatsoever. Genuinely true.
Well, they're shade for
Um,
us, but we kinda
oh yeah,
we're
yeah, that's true.
self-deprecating.
Right. We are garbage. No, we're sorry.
Anything
We're
else that
scrappy
you know
DIY.
So, Eddie, one day I wanna stop being the scrappy underdog. I don't know when that's gonna happen, but I live in hope.
Well, I look forward to hearing that with your new co-host, because
Is there anything else you know about the background or production of it before it came out, before we dive into the epic story?
yeah, I guess the only other thing is uh, uh, Jim Shooter is the editor at this point, which I only bring up because it's relatively early in his days as editor. So we're at kind of a weird point where Claremont and Byrne can kind of do whatever the hell they want, because Shooter's just like, hey, this makes money, just keep doing that. Um, Pretty soon after this, Shooter's going to want to start directing the shape of the comic, and that has interesting consequences. Um, but I bring it up because for all the stick that Jim Shooter gets, and a fair amount of it is deserved, Jim Shooter also curbs both Burns and Claremont's baser instincts. And there's a couple points in here where it's like maybe the editor should have stepped in and redirected away from that particular plot point or that particular element. So,
I am gonna say up front that I miss 2 of the X-Men. One that was killed right away when,
mhm.
Claremont started writing, and the other one who they turned into just a bad character under their pen, and they never figured out quite what to do with the character. I'm not gonna tell you who they are. If you know your X-Men history, you'll know the 2 characters I'm referring to.
Fair
I'm gonna
enough.
say one of them has, like, the power of essentially 1,000 suns and can melt sentinels, and it's not Sentry.
Right, right. He was on the team for a panel.
Oh, yeah, those 2 characters had so much potential, and they're wasted. But we're not here to talk
Right,
about what should have been, but the greatness that is.
right. So we're gonna start with issue 141 of X Men. Hilariously, just pure, stupid media knowledge. Um, how a comic is titled officially is actually in the little legal text blurb. If you have the original comics, the scans almost always eliminate them and reprints always eliminate them. But if you have the original comics, at the bottom of the first page, usually there's a whole bunch of really dense text that tells you what the comic is called. 141 officially is called X-Men. 142, the next issue, is officially called the Uncanny X-Men. So between these two issues, the title legally changes, even though it's called Uncanny X-Men, the cover in both issues. So that's the level of nerd we're going to be at today.
Now I'm curious, when did the uncanny part first even appear on the covers? Like, did 140 have the uncanny?
Oh yeah, Uncanny appeared uh, pretty early on because I think the Uncanny came right around time Claremont's like post 100 ish is around when it first appeared. And
So
it had
post giant
apparently,
sized.
right, yeah. If I remember, Uncanny was flirted with in a few of the earlier runs, but in the same way that the Fantastic Four had the world's greatest comic magazine along the top. So it wasn't really like part of the title. It was just they were called Uncanny, and it kind of solidifies here. But I think I think legally they were wondering if they could. Pro- I think what happened was legally they were A, unsure about the Protect X-Men, but B, I think they're already thinking eventually doing subsequent spin-off comics because it's that popular. And so to distinguish between them for people who are buying the comics, they started thinking about adjective X-Men, which becomes an ongoing trend where there's adjectiveless X-Men and then some kind of adjective X-Men. So it was interesting just from a production standpoint that literally we're right in the middle of that shift in how they perceive the X-Men.
Especially considering I think they jumped off into New Mutants shortly after this, which is
Mhm.
a spin-off of X-Men, but not an X-Men title on the cover.
Right, right. It's wild to see the sand shifting right now. And then I'm not even gonna start open the comic yet because this cover, I mean, one of the most homaged covers, I think, in comics history of Wolverine and Kate Pryde standing in front of a huge poster of various X-Men headshots, with many of them have the word "slain" or "apprehended" slapped across them with a spotlight on them. And it's just I've seen so many versions of this cover over the years. It's really hard to even talk about it.
Because it's fantastic and beautiful. It should be a poster in everyone's room.
Mhm. The one thing I like about the cover is that if you're just glancing at it, it looks like it's probably just another X-Men cover. It's like, of course, all these people are not really dead. That's how comics work. But if you take I was reading online recently on Blue Sky. I was chatting with an artist, and one of the things he said he learned is uh, when you become a good artist, your work rewards someone who takes a longer look at your work, which is a great thing that's helping me as I look at pieces. Like, okay, if I look at this longer, I get more information out of it, and that is a good metric for is this a good piece of art? And from this, if you look at Wolverine and Kate Pryde, you can see that they're older. They're visibly older. And if you've been reading the comic, Wolverine does not have the gray streaks in his hair, and Kate Pryde is very clearly a woman, not a teenage girl in this picture. But if you're just glancing at it, you can still see it's Wolverine and Kitty Pryde. So it's a nice way to kind of show, oh, this is in the future somehow. That's neat.
But funnily enough, now looking at the cover though, with current-ish comic knowledge, and knowing that Wolverine has technically been alive for like 2 or 3 centuries, the time frame of that doesn't make sense for Wolverine to have aged that much now,
Oh
as
no,
they were still developing and figuring out the character.
there are so many problems with this that retcons have just obliterated this timeline, and yet there are chunks of this timeline that are manifestly, distinctly still present because X-Men are amazingly weird.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
the
Now
other
my
thing,
question for you, just off the bat, on the cover, out of the X-Men slain and apprehended, I'm not talking about story wise, but from what you know of the characters by this point in time, do you think that should have happened to them in that sort of dystopia we're about to go into?
like,
Like,
did they deserve it? Is what you're asking, or
no, no, no. For instance, do you think the only one who would still really be free would be Wolverine because Wolverine is the best at what he does? We all know. But
oh,
out of them, Do you think, like, I'm trying to go specifically because Wolverine has always been popular, so that's potentially one of the reasons why Wolverine is free and like out kicking butt and being like the resistance fighter. Based
Right.
on the character's knowledge and power sets, what do you think the likelihood is if we weren't going for popularity? Who would be the person that worked for like the resistance?
I mean, honestly, the fact that Magneto is captured makes the least amount of sense for me. Just because when your entire police force is based around giant clanky metal robots and your main power is screwing with metal, it seems like that's the
Magnetism?
guy's probably gonna stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. The master of magnetism. He's probably gonna be the one actually out there.
Okay. That was that was the one I was really thinking about because I was thinking how exactly would Magneto have been captured given his whole power set?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Uh, uh, I mean,
And
honestly, Kate Pryde
Colossus was my other one
being
actually.
apprehend. Oh, yeah, that makes sense too. Um, I was also gonna say Kate Pryde just because she can literally pass through things, but if she was captured when she was very young, I could see why maybe that because like in this part of the comic, she's still learning even how to use her powers. So if she was apprehended pretty soon after the events that we're gonna dig into, maybe yeah. But otherwise, yeah, just walk right through the people who are trying to arrest you. Done.
Okay. I was just really curious. I know that Banshee's gone like right away. There's no subtlety with the
Right.
power.
Right. Uh, uh, the other thing I find amusing is if you look at the left hand of the poster, what you see cut off are the signatures of Byrne and Austin, which are the artist and inker, respectively. Uh, Claremont's name nowhere on this wall. It's a little snub, but you know, John Byrne's getting a little
Well,
frustrated. You can tell.
because he didn't want to write about Sentinels. And like, I'm just saying.
Right. Anyway, real quick, since I
Oh,
already talked about
all
that.
right.
Oh, God.
Sorry, we keep saying Sentinels. Eddie, what are Sentinels?
I'm actually going to cover that when we get to it in the comic because the comic actually does a decent job of at least mentioning, explaining what they are. So um, I'll get there. Do
Cool.
a plan. But since I've alluded to just to formally cover it, since we're doing Speechless, the writers are Chris Claremont and John Byrne, who are co-plotting. John Byrne is penciling, and Terry Austin is inking. The letterer is Tom, or is it Chowski? I want to say. Colorist is Glynis Wynn, wife of a very famous Wynn, who also did writing. And then the editor is Louise Jones, but the editor in chief is Jim Shooter. Don't think Louise Jones was the X-Men editor for very long, actually. But anyway, start with a splash page where John Byrne is doing his spirit homage of working the title of the comic into the background of the image itself. So you have Days of Future Past written on a huge wall of a clearly post-apocalyptic New York as a very visibly older Kate Pryde is carrying medical supplies. And we
And
see
I love how it's instantly New York just from the tower in the background.
right. It does help that next to that tower is a caption box that says this is New York, the Big Apple. But
Well,
even if you didn't have
it's
that,
much like
you can still see.
it's much how Big Ben is everywhere when we go to England, regardless of where you're at
Right.
in any comic panel.
Exactly. Exactly. The Chrysler Building is somewhere around New York. Uh, and so yeah, so specifically, the panels say that this is the 21st century, which in 1980 was a very specific. This is the future. Now, obviously, it dates it a bit, but the idea this is clearly the future.
Well, all right,
And,
because they probably all watched Escape from New York. Also, I'm just saying.
oh yeah. No, I hadn't thought about that until you just said it. Then yeah, no, especially the next page, the Escape from New York and the Warriors vibes are very clear.
Thank you, because if you hadn't done it, I was going to go Warriors. Ching, 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 ching.
Come out and play.
We may have to cover that movie. You know that, right?
Maybe, yeah, absolutely. Because yeah, page 2, Kate Pryde. I'm going to call her Kate to differentiate. This is older Kate Pryde. She falls into a trap with a bunch of uh, ethnically unfortunate, stereotypical bangsters. Um, one of them is clearly dressed up as a kind of quote unquote Mohawk uh, First Nation character, but more obviously they're themed gangs, which again, as the Warriors reference, is
Yeah.
everyone dresses weird because it's been post-apocalyptic New York. Everyone has to be a cosplayer now. That's just how things work.
Can we take a beat to discuss opening on your post-apocalyptic setting with a an emaciated Jewish woman in a collar, Eddie, running around the city side? Like
Oh
that is
yeah,
a
no,
strong choice to make, given even stronger what we're going to get into over the coming pages.
yes, and to be clear, when we talked about older media before, oftentimes we'll say things like, that's an unfortunate collection, or it was just the times. No, Claremont knows exactly what he's doing here. It is very clear. There's lots of reasons why he's chosen Kitty slash Kate Pride as the center of this story, but one of them is the fact that she is Jewish. That's something that has been made very clear throughout her run as a character. She is very proud of her heritage. She's been in previous issues very openly comparing the plight of mutant kind with her cultural conflicts and atrocities. And so Claremont, this is not an accidental reference. Claremont knows exactly what he's fucking doing.
Because in 1980, I think the only other Jewish character I knew of that it was like part of their character, at least pointed out a lot, was the Thing from the Fantastic Four. I knew like the Thing and Shadowcat. I call her Shadowcat because I like the name Shadowcat better than Sprite or
Right,
Ariel,
definitely
if you
she's
want Ariel.
Sprite. Yeah, and to be fair, the Thing's
Well, and
Jewish
Magneto,
identity
but come on,
rarely comes up. And Magneto was still a villain at this point. So
yeah.
the only heroic Jewish character in Marvel Comics that was open about their identity on a regular basis was Shadowcat. You're absolutely right.
But I wanted to point that out now because before we get into the horror that is going to be the next few pages and everything else, you get a chance to
Right.
see, even under like this oppressive weight, that she's fighting back against these overwhelming odds and not using her powers, which infers something in and of itself too.
hmm Uh, so she gets into a fight, and during the fight, she mentions that the collar she's wearing specifically is an inhibitor collar, which prevents her from being able to use her powers to phase through solid objects. So she has to get a fight, and she says, I'm not gonna make it," but she's clearly doing reasonably well in that fight. She's obviously a skilled fighter, which again at this point in the comic, she had just been brought into the X-Men. She's still learning about her. She's canonically, I think, 14 or 15 at this point. So it shows you already in a short span how far this character has come in a page of panels. Um, but after that, uh, Wolverine shows up to help her out, and
How is he
uh,
always the best at what he does? And then what he does isn't very nice, Eddie. How do you get that staple associated with your name all the time?
sales. That's how. It is interesting to note that again, looking back, Wolverine became extremely popular. Um, Wolverine's not the star of the comic just yet. He's trending that way pretty fast. Partially because he's John Byrne's favorite characters. John Byrne wants more uses to draw Wolverine. It's one of the reasons why he becomes so popular is because John Byrne loves drawing
Mm,
Wolverine.
there we go.
Um, but we're not quite there yet. This comic is when that starts to shift. So at this point, the cover obviously aside, um, Wolverine being around and available in a dystopian world isn't necessarily a given. Nowadays, I'm like, of course it's Wolverine, but now that wasn't quite the case. Uh, so Wolverine fights specifically. He doesn't use his claws, and he makes a note that it's not because he can't; it's because he's worried that will attract the attention of the Sentinels, which are first name dropped here. Um, and so he wants to keep quiet. He is somehow escaping whoever these Sentinels are.
Yeah, and I like the reference to the jammer, which is gonna be critical to, like, the rest of the story.
Yes. It's also a side reference to the fact that Wolverine is part of the Canadian Resistance Army, which implies that whatever has happens to New York apparently has not happens at least in some parts of Canada. So put that into your back of your head as a relevance to 2025. But also,
Yep.
Wolverine is canonically Canadian at this point, so that's another reason why he is part of that. Um, and so, yeah, so Wolverine. The reason Wolverine's here is narrative, not just narrative expediencies, because he wants to hand over a small component of something. It's called the jammer, as Chris says, and he info dumps that it will make all of modules are invisible to Sentinel sensors. And Kate says thanks, and specifically, most notably, they part. Wolverine doesn't like feel a need to continue to protect her. He's like, nope, just here. I happened to walk into a fight, so I cleaned that up for you. Here's the thing: I got other stuff to do. Bye, and takes off.
Well, it's like spies and everything else back, for instance, in World War II, there were drop points.
Hmm.
Sometimes they wouldn't even meet, but this is a chance to meet briefly for a second and then go on. And if the world is as bad as it is, even just like a moment of seeing a friendly face is like a big morale boost in of itself.
Right, exactly, and that's very much there is very much a kind of uh, 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 gritty Cold War espionage vibe about this whole story, which is fantastic. Uh, so Kate catches a bus to make her way to a mutant internment center, and again, small detail because the panel showing the bus in a wide shot is kind of small and cramped and only done in a couple of colors. But the bus is horse drawn, which is another neat little touch telling you about the world that we're in. Is like gasoline is either gone or technology has degraded in some way.
So that is one of the hardest pieces for me to process. Given like it's the Sentinel overlords, Sentinels are very much tech based, and there'll be some other tech pieces. It seems unlikely that they'd go for the inefficiency of animal drawn power to move things around.
I took it as very much a class system. It's like this is public transit, so we're not going to give you energy. We need to have some kind of infrastructure and power. So we'll do that. But energy is in some way a limited resource, so it's going to be reserved for the elites, which means the Sentinels. And since we're here, we see our first Sentinel here. I will now talk about the Sentinels. The Sentinels are giant robots that are purple and blue because Marvel. They were originally created by Bolivar Trask as a way to find, hunt down, and exterminate mutants, as a way to kind of quote unquote give humanity upper hands over the mutant scourge. Insert xenophobic rhetoric here. Uh, so in this future, the Sentinels are now completely in control. We don't yet know who's behind them, why they're suddenly back, because at this point in Marvel Comics, Sentinels are actually no longer a viable concept. I think at one point there's a Trask is doing something like I'll rebuild or something, the usual kind of dangling thread that Claremont likes to do. But the Sentinels have not been a viable concern for a couple of years of publishing this comic. So having them suddenly come back, like you said, it comes down to Byrne really wanted to draw Sentinels and hadn't had a chance to yet, and Claremont really wanted it to be done. But
Oh
on
god.
the bus, we talk about how everyone is marked with a letter, and it talks about three different classes of people: M for mutants, A for anomalous human, which is a human that could pass on mutated genes and therefore not allowed to breed, and H for baseline humans who are allowed to breed. And everyone's clothes very clearly has visible mark of that letter on it. And if you do not get the references to how people were categorized in Nazi Germany, you are not paying attention. It is very, 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 very clear that's what's going for here.
And if you're not aware of that, you should start doing your research now.
Right. Because oh hey, putting people of marginalized classes onto specific lists that the government can track is a thing that is happening now. Uh,
Like,
And
reading this is so hard.
yeah, yeah, this comic in 1980 is super woke and talking shit about the current administration 45 years in the past.
And then when we get down to the panels of the graves themselves, whew,
Yes. So
just from like
because
a comic
the
book reader stance of in the 80s, it's like heartbreaking to see all those names up there.
yeah, uh, and a couple things happen here. First of all, the pure psychological structure of she goes to the internment center, she gets put in, and she is forced to walk by the graveyard. That the graveyard is put right by the gate. That is very clearly an intentional structure to demoralize people. And so we get a long shot of all these gravestones, but then she walks by and sees a bunch of names. And again, there's a bit of nice world building here because most of the names are X-Men characters we know: Scott Summers, Charles Xavier, Warren Worthington, Kurt Wagner. But also you see some
Don't
Fantastic
forget
Four
Laura Dane
characters.
back there. Don't forget Laura
I can't
Dane
even
back
see
there
Laura
in the
Dane.
back that you
Oh
can
yeah, you're
see
right.
like a
I
bit
got
of.
Laura Dane. And you see Bold Draw. I don't know who that's supposed to be. I thought it was Bolivar Trask, but then no, it's a D, not a T. So I don't know if it's a lettering issue or if there's another character supposed to reference that one. I didn't get. Um, but they also
Oh,
have
you
Giant
mean the
Explorer and Ben Graham.
BODRA in the back?
Yeah.
Bobby Drake,
Oh,
Iceman.
okay. All right. No, that makes sense now. Why did they call him Robert? I guess. I don't know. Anyway, point is, they also have other Marvel Universe characters here, which tells us something. And Kate clarifies for us that it's not just mutants they went after. They went after any superpowered characters, and also that this horrible future is not just X-Men. This is not an X-Men specific thing. This is a future the entire Marvel Universe could potentially have.
Because that's how it always starts. They get you to target one specific group and then eventually another, and then they come for you.
Yep. Again, really relevant. So we find out that there are only 4 of the original X-Men left, which are Wolverine, Kate, Storm, and Colossus, along with Franklin Richards, who is the son of Reed and Sue Richards, who, because Reed and Sue Richards were empowered through gamma rays, yeah, gamma rays. Their son is biologically a mutant, and so there's actually been quite a lot of
Well,
or
all
cosmic rays.
right. So
Sorry,
you know
not
a
gamma
lot
rays.
more about.
Comet.
Okay, thank you. You know a lot more about the FF than I did, but I was going to ask about that one.
Well,
Because
I mean,
the Fantastic Four doesn't have a catchy theme song about them being empowered by gamma radiation like the Hulk, my friend.
technically speaking, how the Fantastic Four actually got that powers was because planets at the other end of the universe foretold that they would be a problem, and then therefore tried to irradiate their craft in order to kill them off before they became the people that they ended up actually inadvertently creating. But that's neither here nor there. Uh, Point is, Franklin Richards, who at this point in Marvel continuity, and he will be for weirdly decades, is a child. He's like 5 or 6. Um, but he's still a mutant, and actually his mutant identity is an ongoing, interesting subplot between the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. So here he is considered to be categorized with the mutants.
So then my question for you, Fantastic Four fan and lover, is Franklin Richards a mutant by your definition? Because in the comics, it's wavered over the decades like he's a mutant, he's not a mutant, he's a mutant, he's not a mutant.
Um, I consider him to be a mutant. Until extremely recently, he was officially a mutant, and now he's officially not a mutant because Marvel. uh, uh, but there was an interesting subplot for a while because he was allowed to go to Krakoa because he was a mutant, and long story short, he's now a teenager in Marvel continuity, and so he goes through his angsty teenager phase of like, you can't tell me what to do. I'm a mutant. You aren't my real dad. So it was actually a fun bit of tying mutants with adolescents finding their identity. Um, we also finds uh, uh, Franklin's girlfriend's slash wife, a little unclear relationship, Rachel, who is massively important but not in this story.
She has importance retconned onto her.
Yes. Um, also, Rachel becomes a bit of a queer icon later in the comics, considering that she is a relationship with Franklin. That implies that she is pansexual as opposed to a lesbian, but certainly that is a debate at various points of what her sexual identity is. But anyhow,
Yeah.
I bring it up only because you see her go, oh, first appearance of this character, but it's not as exciting as you think it would be for the first appearance of a character that's going to become fairly big in X-Men mythology. So we see that Kate and Colossus are a couple and have been a couple for a very long time. Now is the point we should probably point out that, again, Kitty is 14 or 15 in the comic, and she and Colossus have a relationship. Colossus is 18 or 19 in the comic.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah. This is one of those points where maybe editors just stepped in and like, so either adjust Kitty's age or write this subplot out or something. This goes for a
okay.
disturbingly long time in the comic, this
Because
relationship.
you're and it would have been so easy. They could have just aged her up 2 years, and that would have
Yeah.
made it okay.
Right. Right. Exactly. But when it's frustrating because like it is in this page is a genuinely sweet relationship. It's just that in the back of my head, it's like, but they met when they were too young to have that relationship. And
So I will admit now, though, I have never been a fan of the Colossus Shadowcat relationship from the drop. I've never liked it. Never
sure.
been a fan of it. I prefer the Shadowcat Magic relationship when Magic is old enough, or even in the alternate universe,
Yes.
Shadowcat and Spider-Man.
So we, honestly, my main problem with the main problem I have with the Shadowcat Colossus relationship is that it's reciprocal. When this first starts, it's Shadowcat has a crush on Colossus, and honestly, I think that's fine because that's very much a thing for a young girl to do is to have a crush on a slightly older person, and to blow that up in her head more than it really is. The problem is that Cyclops is going, yes, I'm totally cool with this, and also I have a problem with on top of that him then going to Secret Wars and going on second thought, never mind, which again
Yes,
is a thing
there's
teenage
this
boys do.
voluptuous alien who I've met for Secret Wars.
Right, right. But because now they are husband and wife in the future, it implies a certain kind of inevitability to their relationship, which is uncomfortable, and thankfully has been largely ignored now. They're in no way, shape, or form a couple now.
Yeah, last I heard, wasn't she with Star-Lord for a while, and didn't Shadowcat become Star-Lord?
Yes, yes. And Colossus, I believe, is probably still moping because that's what Colossus does.
Mm. It could have been
But
like
anyway,
in the God, what was it? The Apocalypse ones where Shadowcat and Colossus were still married, and that had a very dark, gruesome ending to it, if you remember that one.
right, right.
Yeah, because Colossus in other universes is not a good dude.
And digression, but that's actually I always took that as a very clear refutation of like why they maybe shouldn't have been a couple, right? Because that in that dark future, they are not nice people. They are a couple because they like fucking with people. And so they realized, oh, look,
Yeah.
you're also a sadist. Let's hang out together. So I always took that as kind of a refutation of that relationship, which I enjoyed.
So, as a side note, if people want us to cover the Age of Apocalypse run, let us know. I think we would do that in a heartbeat.
Yes, it is a long run, but we'd find a way to make that work.
Oh, that's some real stuff. But we're not here to talk about that alternate dark future.
Right. Um, basically, the pieces are being made to create the jammer. Turns out to be a way to neutralize the inhibitor collars. And so the plan is, and I am not making any of this up, is that Rachel is going to use thus far undefined magic powers to send Kate Pryde's mind back in time to 1980 to inhabit her teenage body so she could stop a horrible event to cause this evil future to never happen.
They don't say magic. You said magic. You can't randomly use the word magic in a Marvel comic because that infers other
Fair.
things.
I'm using
Unknown
magic in the sense
psychic
of
powers.
I don't think I don't think they even say she's psychic. They just say her powers. So I'm using magic as
She's sending her mind back, but sending the mind infers psychic.
Disagree, because Doctor Strange does that all the goddamn time.
Doctor Strange actually projects. There's a different. These are very. I will fight you on this front. These are very definitive terms when you're speaking in comic land. So you have to be specific.
So Rachel Richards uses undefined psychic powers to send Kate's mind back in time, because that is
Would you
totally
like for us to have a
how.
middle ground? And says she, this you're gonna love this. A middle ground. She cast her back in her mind back in time.
There we go. There we go.
How you like
Just
that?
kind of leave it there. Leave it there. So we go to next page and we go to an X-Men staple, which is the Danger Room. And I love the Danger Room because
Fucking love it.
part of what the Danger Room is purely as a narrative device, because at this point in time, they're still under a well-known edict from Stan Comic, which is that Stan Lee, which is that every comic is someone's first. So whenever possible, you have to kind of recap what everyone's deal is in the comic. So in the Fantastic Four, this is usually the Thing and the Human Torch get into a fight, and the adults in the room, which are Reed and Sue Richards, have to break it up. And so as a chance, they all get to show off their powers. In this case, the Danger Room is they have a training room so that all the X-Men who are currently present can use their powers to show off what their thing is and what they do. It's actually extremely efficient, works really well. And in this case, someone has left the door unlocked, and Kitty Pryde, who has just become an X-Men 5 minutes ago, has walked into the Danger Room.
But Eddie, we know for a fact because Wolverine shouted at us, the door is always unlocked.
That is yet another health and safety issue in the Marvel Universe that I have strong concerns about.
Based on this and looking at this, I assume that this is before they had Shi'ar technology in the Danger Room.
Yes, this is still when the Danger Room is still physical. The Shi'ar stuff comes when Xavier comes back from his hiatus.
So,
I don't think he's,
which
not
leads
in
me to my
hiatus yet.
next question. How much money does Professor X really have to be able to constantly have these Stark level technologies that his students are destroying on a daily basis because they say they trade daily?
He is an unspecified plot amount of money, but I will point out that he's frequently seen one of the big kind of running gags, I guess, not running gag, getting references as to why Xavier is not in this week's issue, is because Xavier is off testifying to Congress. So I have always in my head assumed that he's actually a paid government consultant on mutant affairs, and that's where he got his money from.
That seems like a lot of money. That's all I'm going to say. A lot of money.
This is the same U.S. government that is able to invest heavily into giant mutant killing robots. Pointing that out.
All right.
But anyway, yes, Wolverine points out that it's because doors unlocked, and so all the different characters try to stop Kitty from being hurt from the danger room, because they're used to a certain amount of danger, and so they have ratcheted the danger up a little bit in said danger room. One thing that's interesting to note is that you'll see the Storm make references to how she is the leader. That is because at this point in time, Cyclops is no longer the leader of the X-Men. This will turn out to be a temporary situation, but it was not intended to be. Originally, Chris Claremont wanted the membership of the X-Men to be very fluid, and so his original plan was that Jean Grey and Cyclops after the Dark Phoenix Sonics, they were going to get married, and they were more or less going to be out of the book. So that was his original plan. But at this point in time, again, the comic's getting very popular, and so it's like, no, you can't change the formula because it's popular, and so he had to find reasons to write Cyclops back in. But we're at a point where Storm is, in her head, the official leader of the X-Men. That will turn out to be a temporary situation, and to be fair, it leads to interesting character development for Storm down the road. But right now, as far as anyone's concerned, Storm is leader.
Well, it's just not in her head. Professor Xavier also said she was the leader of the X-Men.
Well, I mean, I meant in her head in the sense of she's her frustrations throughout this two-part story are partially because she is learning to accept the responsibility of being leader. So not in her head as like it's a delusion. In her head as in that's
Okay.
something that's on her mind is what I meant. So
Yeah.
no,
And because
it's not a
you're
delusion.
right, Cyclops will
She is
come
officially the
back.
leader.
Cyclops comes back, and then it's awkward with him with all these people. He needs a leader. And then, if I remember right, he and Storm actually have a fight to determine who gets to be the leader, and Storm beats Cyclops. And this is even depowered Storm defeats Cyclops.
Right. Exactly. Also leads to one of my favorite ongoing things of like Claremont, where he tries to bring something vaguely resembling physics into to Marvel, which is always a hilarious attempt. But this is a part where he's trying to do that for a while. So Kitty flies through the air. Cyclops goes to catch her and changes from metal to flesh because he's worried that if he catches her with metal form, she'll just splatter against his metal form. So he changes to flesh to give more of a cushion for her when he catches her. And I'm like, I don't think physics works that way, but it sounds good, so sure.
You don't know. She's a sprite. Her bones could be hollow, like Angel's bones are hollow.
Oh God, yes, that's true. They are canonically hollow at this point, aren't they?
Yeah. I will say though, that's Angel's best costume in this comic.
It is.
And I'm not even a fan of Angel.
Yeah, this is actually one of the and this is his post Champions run, which gets a weird reference later in the comic. He was briefly the financier and part of a very brief team called the Champions, where he actually became an interesting character for a while, and he and Claremont inherits that for a bit. But then we have
Okay. How does Angel work on this team, Eddie?
he
I still
dodges
keep
things.
thinking right now. Really? Come on.
Yeah, he dodges things.
Come on. Even on the original X-Men team, I always had a problem with Angel. If your inherent only superpower is flight, it seems that would be a difficult power to constantly use in the midst of combat where people have magnetism, optic blast, or even the blob. It's okay.
You are
I like it.
forgetting Warren Worthington's secondary mutation, Chris, which is inexhaustible wealth.
All right, then yes, you can be on the team.
He is the rich guy, which I think answers your question about where Xavier gets his money.
All right, thank you for that reminder.
Anyway.
I forgot for a second.
But this leads to I think my favorite Danger Room scene ever, where Kitty's nervous about doing Danger Room for the first time, saying, "We've set all the settings down low. You'll be fine. Nothing's gonna hurt you. Everything's gonna be okay." They're really reassuring her. So she closes her eyes, goes incorporeal, and literally just walks through the entire Danger Room and avoids the entire Danger Room completely.
And the fact that they're all cracking up in the control room, that is like what nails it at the end. Like, yes.
Yes. And like specifically, it sets up one of my favorite relationships in the comics because Wolverine particularly thinks this is amazing. He's like, she literally beat the Danger Room with her eyes closed, and her eyes are closed because she's terrified. Wolverine is intentionally, I think, recontextualizing it as how much of a badass she is, and it leads to him becoming a mentor for Kitty for a good chunk of this comic. That is one of my favorite relationships, honestly.
Well, it's Wolverine's thing. He always becomes mentor to younger, primarily, I think, like younger female characters throughout the course of his career. It's like who he becomes. because we've
Right.
got
But it starts here.
Jubilee. I think we've got Armor that happens later, and even
Mhm.
Laura for a while too.
Oh, yeah, X-23, yep. Mhm. Uh, but then the Kate then inhabits the body of Kitty, she falls over, and then next page, they're doing tests, and it's like, she has the same brain wave patterns, but one's more complicated than the other, and then, in the midst of this, Nightcrawler had made a comment that Kitty seems very nervous around him, and he's worried because it's like, I'm used to people reacting badly to my appearance, but I don't like it when friends do that or potential friends do that. But when Kate wakes up, she gives him a hug and then immediately tells everyone she's not acting like Kitty anymore. It was a great way to kind of shortcut that.
No,
Oh, something's weird here.
Nightcrawler makes a distinction. It's not even friends that bother him if they do that. It's when an X-Men does it. So that infers like a deeper layer of relationship with his fellow
Right.
mutants and even just friends. So it becomes like when your
That's true.
family does it to you.
That's fair. That's fair.
And given the story we're talking about, that level of complexity is like an offhanded comment, but so important that resonates with the story.
Right. Um, next couple of pages are how we got to dystopia. So I'll kind of just quickly summarize those. Basically, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants assassinates assassinates or causes assassination to happen. They trying to remember exactly. Uh, yeah. In 1880, assassination happens. This leads to a backlash, which causes an anti-mutants candidate to become elected and introduces the Mutant Control Act. They resurrect the Sentinels as a result of the Mutant Control Act. So now they actually have U.S. funding, the way to kind of deal with this.
The Congress strikes
You were
down the
saying?
Mutant Control Act, and then they do it anyway. I want to point that
Oh, right.
out
Sorry.
for
Thank
all
you.
the
Thank you.
fellow people in
No, good point.
2025, how ineffective Congress is to stop insane presidents.
No, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. I did skip over that. You're right. So they tried to pass the act. It failed. They do it anyway. Um, probably through a presidential order. Just saying. Um,
Do you like how Doctor Doom has a little
that
X on his face too? They took out Doom, Eddie. They
yes,
took out Doom.
but yeah, they start taking out non-mutant super beings. And the fact they kill Doctor Doom implies that the U.S. Decides to extend this outside of the U.S. borders, which again, another extremely interesting and relevant points to make in 2025. Um,
And they take
and
out
then
T'Challa. Just saying.
yes, you're right
That's.
too. So another example of them illegally expanding their dictates beyond their own borders.
Do you know who the best
Uh,
place and the best person to be if you're still stuck on Earth? Imperious Rex,
that's
or
true. Yeah.
Submariner. For those of you that are curious about that.
Who is technically a mutant? So
Yeah.
if you want to send your big clunky robots into the water, have fun with that. See how that goes for you.
Originally, for a while, he was the first mutant, but then that got retconned, and I think Apocalypse is the first mutant.
Yes, because he became the first mutant in like a gazillion years ago, BC.
Yeah.
So
Apocalypse.
I don't like, but whatever. Anyway, so we go back to the far future year of 2013, where
Fucking
Sentinels
old.
break into their secret base, straight up murder Franklin Richards. And Rachel feels Franklin die, so he's just dead, as far as anyone knows. The
If
rest
you
of the
look at that
X-Men,
graphic energy blast, there is no way that he's walking away from that.
I mean, on the one hand, it's
That
Marvel
small
Comics,
little panel
so
of him screaming.
yeah, right. I mean, anyone can come back from dead, but also it looks pretty definitive. Yes. Storm goes to incapacitate one. fastball special where Colossus throws Wolverine. He claws into them. More Sentinels show up. Colossus knocks a building on top of them. Uh, Side notes, there is a we saw before that 1984 was when they attempted to pass the Mutant Registration Act. The building that Colossus tries to knock down has a billboard on the side that says "New for 1985 Oldsmobile." So it implies that it was about a year before the Sentinels completely took over at least New York. So
I love the visual storytelling.
yeah, it's really, really good.
And you get to see
Um,
all of them as older. And Colossus, even his metal form, has grayish. He's like salt and pepper hair, even the metal
I
form.
love it. I love it. It's so good. Um, and so they decide that the X Men are going to hit the Baxter Building, which is the originally the Fantastic Four's headquarters, and is now the base for the Sentinels. And I mean, at this point, I was like, that's kind of arbitrary, but they actually do explain a bit later why the Baxter Building was chosen.
Are
Uh,
you kidding me? If I was a villain, I would take over the Baxter Building in New York first and right away. The sheer amount of tech that Reed has stored away in that building that no one knows about. Oh,
that that's more or less the reason they actually give, which is that basically the Sentinels want to consolidate who has control of the tech, so to take control of the biggest store of tech in New York and keep it for themselves. That way, they can control who gets technology, which again is implied by the visual storytelling of the horse-drawn bus, which when you think about it makes no goddamn sense, but tells you everything you need to know about this world. Again, Burns doing a
yeah.
great job of telling what this world's about through pure visuals. That's really, really great. Uh, so we
I'm
go
curious who the
to
Sentinels
the.
might have sent
Oh.
into the negative zone.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, yes. Again, retcon wise, who can go to the negative zone is now an interesting debate. But for all I know, yeah, they may be like, you know what, this is prison now. Whoop, shove in there. Um, so we cut to the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. We find out that Mystique has infiltrated the Pentagon in the guise of a woman named Raven Darkholm, who at this point in time is just the name of the person who she's infiltrating as, but turns out to be her actual real name. So retroactively, this is this really weird move to infiltrate under
have
your
you ever
actual name.
have you ever been in the Pentagon?
I have not actually, no.
It is so easy to get lost in that building. Oh, like
Really?
blah. That's all I'm going to say about it. That's all I can say. Super easy to get lost in that building.
Is that why they have giant arrows painted on the side of the wall?
You're laughing. I'm saying it's, parking's also a pain in the dick trying to get there.
Fair enough. She works out of the office of the Assistant Director of Defense and Research, Defense for Research and Development, um, which is totally
How did she sneak
going to be.
in those wanted criminals, Eddie, into the Pentagon? They would have had to go through badging. And I'll all right.
I,
I'll let Destiny go. I'll even let Avalanche go. I will even generously let Pyro go. But the Blob, who we've established was in prison, they would know that when they look at his ID, and he's not an easy man to miss.
that's the fascinating thing is like all the other characters you mentioned. This is the new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Most of them are in prison. Whatnot. Blob not only is one of the original evil mutants, but he doesn't wear a costume. He just looks like who he is. And in case you thought maybe this is kind of weird oversight, the Blob points out repeatedly as a point of pride he is the one of the original evil mutants. So this is a well-known canonical fact. And the
Yep.
Pentagon's like, oh yeah, we totally arrested you, but yeah, you can come in and hang out. That's cool. Have our
Even
bar.
more so that you're a mutant and we hate mutants. Please, please come into this government building.
Right. Um. But real quick, Destiny is a precog. She is blind, but she's still able to quote unquote see the future. Um, Avalanche can cause objects to crumble with a single touch, and also creates avalanche or tidal wave effects. Pyro can control Flame he officially is control living flame. I do not know what the distinction between living flame and other kinds of flame are. He controls fire. He doesn't make fire. He can
That
control it.
no, he can't make fire. That is
They say
what
he
they
cannot
mean
make
by
fire.
living
He can
flame.
control it.
Okay. So I think living flame infers the fact that it exists. It is breathing air, so it's actually a fire, and it's not him going fire. That's why he has to have that
Oh,
freaking canister on his back. That's just like the worst thing ever.
yes. Oh, Chris Claremont. Um, Mystique is a shapeshifter, and the Blob is a very large man who cannot be damaged and cannot be moved unless he wants either of those things to happen.
My
And it
question for you then, Eddie, if Mystique is a shapeshifter, why can't she turn into a bird or a plane or a goat?
so I mean the real answer is well because how writers handle powers are horribly inconsistent in Marvel. But I believe at this point her shapeshifting powers limit her to her own size and weight. So she can only shapeshift into other people that are roughly her size. I, that rule gets broken constantly throughout the comics.
So this is a Chris thing that I dislike the use of the word shapeshifter for Mystique because Mystique
Right,
isn't, in my opinion, a shapeshifter. Morph, who turns into like various other people and objects and everything else, would be a shapeshifter. Mystique can alter
right,
her appearance. There's a distinct difference between that power set. She makes great
well,
use of
right,
it because she's a spy.
right. But you're right. I mean, she is basically just very good at disguise. She her mutant power is disguise, really. Whereas your morph, right? I mean, morph outside of the animated series when he's written in the comics, Morph takes shapeshifting to logical extreme where he's functionally a living cartoon because he can change into literally anything. And so his ability to accept damage and to do things is just basically unlimited.
And even when morph changes, morph if the person morph changes into as a physical aspect like wings, morph can fly or do some semblance of their power to some extent. Mystique can't do that. Mystique, if she turns into Wolverine, looks like Wolverine. That's it.
Right. Right.
She looks like Angel. It's a Chris
Uh,
quibble that I've had ever since the movie where it was like where Sebastian Shaw kills Darwin in that movie, and then Mystique has Darwin's powers. Ever since then, I've
right.
been a staunch line that it doesn't work like that. Ah.
No. Unless those powers can be replicated some way by changing your appearance. Otherwise, yes, I agree. But
So
anyway,
that's it.
so
Rant over.
the evil mutants squabble, which is again a very cool way to show off their various powers. Um, and basically comes down to uh, Mystique's putting her foot down, saying, "I'm not Magneto. I'm doing my own thing." And what we're going to do is we are going to assassinate Senator Kelly in the U.S. Senate, and that's happening more or less now. They're getting their stuff together to attempt to assassinate Senator Kelly. So we
The
so
the other thing about the group before we move on to the assassination bit that I know you want to get to is I want to touch on the relationship between Mystique and Destiny, which goes back to a similar thing as we're going to have between Kate and Rachel. Is they keep using the term friend in this, but they really mean like lover or they're in a relationship. And
right.
it could be the comic, like the comics code of the 80s. They can imply it, but they can't state it. So that is a solid piece that's the undercurrent here that we're also not going into.
True. I will state a couple things. One of which is that because Chris Claremont's still around, he is able to say, "No, I've always intended them to be a couple." And comics nowadays have canonized that they officially are a couple. In fact, I think they're married now. We that's one case where the subtext was proved to actually be text and has been made text. But even stripping all of that metatextual and future knowledge aside, in this scene, you're right. Mystique says in her as her mental recap of all the characters is she's like, uh, she is the only one that I can trust, which heavily implies a deeper past relationship that we had not been privy to until now.
Yes.
So when Kate does the recap of how I got here, she says is the assassination of Senator Kelly that caused all of the future to happen. So the X-Men rush to a Senate hearing where Professor Xavier and his previous love interest, now friend and consultants, Moira McTaggart from Scotland, who is a doctor and studies mutants physiology. Uh, uh, I think officially she's won a Nobel Prize. I think she's a geneticist. Yeah, I think officially she's a geneticist. And so they are testifying on matters of mutant affairs, and Kelly is heavily slanting the questions against them.
Yeah.
Because as we all know, these Senate hearings are not really designed to do anything. They're designed to generate sound bites so that people can get elected. That is all these things are good for.
And then we get the
Which,
scene that you're talking about where Warren Worthington shows up and they're like, he used to like have a group called the Champions.
right. And it's like, remember the Champions? And you go, no. And it's like, anyway, moving on.
They were so irrelevant, they didn't even put an editorial note in there for you.
No. It's like, see, Champions Law. It's like, no, you can't buy this because no one bought it. So don't worry about it. And a little note, one thing that particularly around this time period that writers and artists love to do is they love to quietly acknowledge the other companies' products in a deniable way. So, famously, in the 70s, there was one small town that yearly had a superhero parade. Basically, would just get into a parade of people dressing with superhero things. And there was one story where I believe it was the Avengers showed up, did a thing there, and then left right before the parade started. And then the next
That's
day was
right.
the parade, and then the DC comic picked up that next day and did a completely different
Yeah.
story.
That's with the Justice
There's
League,
another
right?
small I think it was Just League, yeah. So it was like the first quote unquote crossover between the two, even though it was officially never happened. Um, but in here we have tell Lois to get an interview with Warren, which kind of probably is a reference to Lois Lane. Um, and of course it's even funnier because we know John Byrne in 4 years is going to go to DC. So
She's just like laying the groundwork.
right. But then Avalanche literally disintegrates a wall in the U.S. Senate, and the X-Men happen to be there because Storm wanted to make sure they were there. So the issue ends with the evil mutants and the X-Men facing off in the middle of the U.S. Senate to try to prevent an assassination. Next time, Time Out of Mind, which is actually the title of the next issue. So that's a surprise.
Where was the X-Men's phone booth, Eddie?
They just change. They just do it. There's a
Like, they're dressed as civilians, wall collapses, costume. Where is that phone booth? How did they change? Or did Storm's lightning bolt has a power that instantly changes them all in their costumes?
now. I will say later on, Storm explicitly does have that power, which is weird. It's not here yet. But they see Warren. The building collapses as soon as the wall collapses, which takes a minute. Then Mystique goes on and does a pretty lengthy monologue about why she's there for. So they've got about 2 minutes to get changed. I mean,
Where are
let me
they
read this to
changing?
you.
Where are they changing?
That wall's coming down, and because Senator Kennedy asked a question before the wall came down. So, an apt question, Senator Kelly, and one with its own answer, for we all know what the first Cro-Magnon did to the last Neanderthal. I am Mystique. My colleagues and I comprise the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. We are your future humans. Resist us at your peril. You've been babbling a lot about the mutant cat menace, Kelly. We're here to teach you the error of your ways. This goes on forever, right? I mean, there's time to, pull some clothes off. But also they're doing it around a bunch of people with cameras and people are around. It's The reason is because, oh shit, it's the last page.
But
That is
it
what
is
it
a
is.
great cliffhanger to end the Comic Con. Joking
It
aside.
is. It is. And I mean, we did spend a lot of time talking about the lead up to the comic more than usual. But even then, like, there's also a lot of comic that we glossed over. Normally, we go page by page on Speechless, but we kind of glossed over some chunks of it because there's a lot of explaining and talking that needs to happen. I'm always continually surprised going back to these Bronze Age comics, late 70s, early 80s comics, just how much comic you get in them for the time
Yeah,
period. It's
because
always a treat to go, man, this takes a while.
as I was reading this the other day, I was thinking to myself, "This is probably almost over," and then I had like another 10 pages to go.
Yeah, yeah. I had the exact same reaction. It's just like, oh, they'll probably end at the revelation of she's really Kate, and it's like, no, that's like halfway through the issue. And I'm like, man, it just keeps going.
To your point earlier, this would have been like a 5 issue arc these days.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and the fact that this was a two, I mean, we just come off a huge epic of X Men, but even then, like having a 2 issue story like this was still pretty big. So yeah, this was not quite an event comic, but certainly the fact that it spread to another issue was seen. It made it bigger than it would normally have been. Um, and yeah, I mean, even though there's a lot going on, it's still the efficiency of, like we talked about before, the visual world building, so that even though there's a lot of explaining the world, it's only just enough to get you to where you need to go, which I think is interesting and important. So it's a good balance of the visual storytelling and dialogue getting you to where you need to be, which is great. And it's just a very different style than we do nowadays, and I like it.
Yeah, beautiful. So, anything else about this before we can eventually talk about the next episode, the big one, like the finale? What really happens?
Yeah, no, so I mean, yeah, next issue is we're gonna talk about issue 142, which the cover says everybody dies. Spoiler, not everybody dies. We'll talk about that next time.